Hello, I am Marcia Ferranto, CEO of the National Law Enforcement Memorial and Museum. Our museum opened its doors in 2018 with the express purpose of telling and honoring the story of American law enforcement. But almost 30 years before that, the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial was dedicated in Washington, D.C. to honor law enforcement officers from across the country who have made the ultimate sacrifice for the safety and protection of our nation and its people. The memorial changes each year as names are added to the wall. Today, the memorial bears the names of 22,611 officers who have fallen in the line of duty. As we remember the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, we can't help but consider the tremendous loss of life. As we know from our own site, memorials play an important part in helping us remember those we've lost. Even our new special exhibit, Post 9/11, The Evolution of American Law Enforcement, contains a memorial element to honor those officers who died as a result of 9/11. For today's special program, our third in a series related to the Post 9/11 exhibit, we've brought together leaders from 9/11 memorials as well as from our own Law Enforcement Officers Memorial to discuss the role memorials play in our lives. Before we begin, I want to thank our generous sponsors whose generosity brought this exhibit to life. Many thanks to the Police Unity Tour, Goodyear, the Fraternal Order of Police, Virginia, BioOne Inc., Thomson Reuters, 511 Tactical, Adam R. Rose, and Peter R. McQuillan, Production Solutions, Grant Mail Direct Marketing. We also need your help so that we can continue our efforts to tell the stories of American law enforcement. So grab your phones. This will only take 30 seconds. Make a donation to the museum by texting Programs 2021 to 41444. Your generosity will make a real difference. And now our moderator for today's discussion, Braden Painter. Braden is the Director of Methodology and Practice at the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience, a global network of historic sites, museums, and memory initiatives that connect past to present, changing the world one memory at a time. As part of his efforts, Braden has trained hundreds of organizations in dialogue, community engagement, planning, and operating at the intersection of history and justice.
Thanks, Marcia. And hi, everyone. My name is Braden Painter. I'm the Director of Methodology and Practice at the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience. The coalition is a network of museums, historic sites, places of memory, more than 330 sites in more than 65 countries around the world. We regularly see communities around the globe thinking about how to use monuments and memorials as places to think about the past, heal in the present, and move into the future, and move into building more just and humane futures. And so I'm really excited to talk with you all today and hear from some folks who are doing this really important work at a number of memorials around the United States. We're lucky enough to be joined today by Stephen Clark, Superintendent of the National Parks of Western Pennsylvania, which includes oversight of the Flight 93 National Memorial, Jim Lachak, Executive Director of the Pentagon Memorial Fund, Pat Montori, Executive Director of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial, and our wonderful hosts today, and Amy Weinstein, Senior Curator of Oral History and Vice President of Collections for the National September 11th Memorial and Museum. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks. Great. And maybe just to get us started as we think about the roles that memorials can play in our many communities' lives, maybe we could just set the table a little bit with where each of your memorials came from. So would you tell people a little bit uh, about how your memorial was created, who created it, what their hopes were for it, and who they kind of had in mind as they were creating this? Maybe Pat, would you get us started?
Absolutely, I would love to. And the most beautiful spot in the world to me, National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial, located in Washington, D.C. And in 1984, between 1988 and 84 and 1988, Congressman Biaggi and Craig Floyd went on an effort to try to make the National Law Enforcement Officer Memorial a reality. And then they did so in 1988. It took till 1991 for our memorial to be reality, which we all see today, its beauty in Washington, D.C. It was made for everyone. It was made for law enforcement families that lost their loved ones. It was made for citizens that they served and protected for generations and years, faithfully knowing that they could die in a line of duty. So this place was the most amazing place you could see when you walk through it. And today I had a conversation so briefly with our CEO, Marcia Ferranto, and she said, well, how do you feel when you walk through there? And I said, I feel honorable. I feel powerful feelings of stories and contributions yet to be told, because each and every one of those souls on that wall were there because they chose that profession. They chose to be there for the call of duty. No one chooses to die, but it's us, those who are here at the memorial service, to recognize them, not annually, every day. And that's what we choose to do here at the memorial. And we've grown, obviously, to a museum. We've grown to a point where we're trying to keep our officers safe with officer safety and wellness. And the person who created our memorial and its beauty, I would be remiss not to say, is Davis Buckley, our architect. His beauty is displayed. And as we see again his artwork, as we go into, unfortunately, an expansion, because our wall is growing, because each and every year our officers die. And unfortunately, we're a living memorial. We currently sit at 22,611 souls, officers, men and women. And now we'll be approaching that moving forward next year again, as we have a May of 22. And unfortunately, again, we will be sharing those names. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Amy.
Thank you. And what Pat just said, I feel like I want to respond to while also explaining. So I'll see what I can do. The National September 11th Memorial was created as the result of an international design competition, which began in early 2003, but really the desire to create a memorial began organically within a few days after 9/11, at least in New York, and I think around the country and around the world. People began having ideas about what might be appropriate. Among those people was Michael Arad, an Israeli-born American architect who sketched out some ideas thinking about water and a void and doing a memorial in the river in the Hudson. But there was an organized international jury design competition, and Michael submitted an entry, and he as part of the process, he and Peter Walker, a landscape architect, came together to evolve the design. We call it the 9/11 Memorial, but it has a name. It's called Reflecting Absence, and it reflects the absence of life, but the trees on the plaza reflect the growth of life and the movement, the progress of time. Something Pat said about expanding the memorial. We've only been open a few years, but we realized that with so many people dying because of 9/11 related health consequences, health issues, cancers and respiratory issues, that we wanted to do something to honor their loss. So we created a new section of the memorial called the Glade. And that's a bit more abstract in that there are no names on the Glade, as they are around the North and South Tower Pool. And we won't know all those names for quite a few more years to come, but they're honored collectively. And for us, September 11th, yes, it's a date on the calendar, but it is something we are acutely aware of and live every day.
Thank you as well. And we're going to move into, we'll do a round of sort of introductions, and then I hope we do get to some of those responses, because that's one of the values in bringing together folks with all of your different experiences, is to be able to try and share and build together, for maybe add something to folks who are listening and are thinking about memorialization in their own life and in their own world in some way. So thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, and good afternoon. So as the superintendent of Flight 93 National Memorial, we collectively, with our partnerships and our volunteers, we tell the story of United Airlines Flight 93, the fourth hijacked airliner on September 11, 2001. So the beginning of the memorial itself, similar to what Amy and Pat had shared, was that it really kind of came from the ground up, kind of a concept immediately following September 11th, that one of the three attack sites was going to become part of the national park system, a branch of the Department of Interior. And through a series of processes, Flight 93 came to be that unit of the national park system. So oftentimes for national parks, it takes decades to have the research, and then ultimately Congress and the president sign it into law. But remarkably, in this case, George W. Bush signed Flight 93 National Memorial into law on September 24th, 2002. So just a little over a year, which is, again, unheard of, Flight 93 National Memorial was born. And through a series of tremendous partnerships and many years, parcels of land were purchased. And then finally, for the 10-year anniversary in 2011, the plaza, the wall of names, the sacred ground, the boulder was created and dedicated. And then 2015, phase 2, which is the learning center and the visitor center. And then finally, the image behind me is the Tower of Voices, dedicated in September of 2018. And that tower is almost 10 stories, 93-foot high tower containing 40 wind chimes, each of which weigh 200 to 300 pounds, driven by the beautiful Western Pennsylvania wind. So being a national memorial similar to Oklahoma City and USS Arizona and so many within the National Park Service, we stand very proud, along with Jim and the Pentagon Memorial, and of course, Amy and Alice and all of her colleagues in New York. And certainly as a law enforcement officer myself for the National Park Service for 29 years, before I came into the superintendent rank 6 years ago, I too have lost dear friends in the line of duty, state troopers and law enforcement rangers who are on that wall, as Pat mentioned, and nothing but the utmost respect for what Pat and his team do. And Police Week means so much to me and so many. And again, once again, it's an honor to be a part of this panel.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think for a lot of folks probably listening and the folks on the panel, right, this is both, as you were saying, right, personal, it's professional, it's sort of rooted in individual lives, and also in the kind of the larger view you're taking as well through your work. So thanks for being able to walk both sides of that. Jim.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you for allowing me to participate in this. I lost my brother Dave in the Pentagon on 9/11, and that is essentially how I got involved with the creation of the Pentagon Memorial and the creation of the Pentagon Memorial Fund, which is the nonprofit that I now serve as executive director. But very similar to the New York Memorial, we worked very closely. There was a design competition, but we worked very closely with the Department of Defense, because the family members all felt that the memorial needed to be there on the grounds of the Pentagon. So it was a little bit of a different situation, but we worked very closely with the Pentagon. There was a design competition. It started shortly, the planning for it started shortly after the attack. This was probably in November, where a group of families got together as asked to be steering committee members, and I was one of those families. And there was an international design competition similar to the New York Museum, and basically they had these designs or ideas or posters that were held in the National Building Museum in Washington, D.C. And you can imagine going through room after room of these designs. There was over, I think, 2,000 designs that were submitted from 66 different countries around the world. And it was really unbelievable to see these designs. So we went through a process to narrow down the designs, and we selected 5 or 6, I think 6 finalists who could then come up with a model or a concept design. And the jury met again, and it was consisted of family members, myself and another woman who lost her father on this steering design competition committee. There were former secretaries of defense that were on it, artists and architects from around the world, around the country to participate in it. And was facilitated by a woman, Carol Anderson Oster, who worked for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So it was a very interesting project and process to follow. But we basically came up with a design that was submitted by a couple from New York, Keith Caseman and Julie Beckman. And it was essentially a memorial unit for each person that died. And it was arranged according to the age lines of the victims. Starting with a 3-year-old little girl, Dana Falkenberg, was on Flight 77, all the way up to 71-year-old John Yamnicki, who was also on the flight, but a retired Navy captain. And I describe it as a individual memorial, a collective memorial, and it kind of tells a story about what happened that day, because each memorial unit is arranged according to the age line that the victim was born. So in other words, my brother was born in 1961. His memorial unit is on the 1961 age line with all the other people who were born that year. But each memorial unit has a different directionality based on whether they were in the plane or in the building. So when I read the name at the end of this bench, and it's a cantilevered bench over a pool of water, I'll see my brother's name, but I'll also see the Pentagon in the background. For someone who's on the plane, that orientation is reversed. I'll read the name at the end of the bench, and I'll see the sky in the background. And another subtlety to it is each of the age lines are oriented according to the flight path of the plane into the building. So in a very subtle way, as you're walking through the park that has these benches, the flow of water, trees, shrubbery around the outside, you're oriented to where the plane came through the building. The Pentagon was rebuilt in a year, but it's still important for family members to be able to see, and visitors to be able to see where that plane came through the building. So we had the design in 2002. The Pentagon Memorial Fund was the nonprofit created, and we worked very closely with the Department of Defense to raise the money to design and build the Pentagon Memorial. And we were dedicated, the memorial was dedicated in September of 2008. I think it was the first of the 3 9/11 memorials that were dedicated in this country. And I remember talking about what the family members wanted, and what we wanted people to remember our loved ones. We wanted people to remember what happened there that day. And we want people to remember that feeling of unity that came through and swept through our country after 9/11, that kind of bringing together people to comfort all those who were in such pain. So with the memorial has stood the test of time very well. It still attracts a lot of visitors. Unfortunately, because it's on the grounds of the Pentagon right now, it's been closed over concerns of COVID, because there's really no way to regulate visitors into the memorial. So there's concern that groups of visitors could gather together, or tour buses could come up. So it's a well-visited memorial. There's probably over 1 million visitors that come every year when it's open. About 3/4 of them school kids. So our next focus now is to create a visitor education center adjacent very close to the memorial to complement the memorial, because there's a whole generation of children, kids that are growing up that have no memory of 9/11. They don't remember the horror, the audacity of flying planes into buildings as missiles and what happened that day. So our focus now is to build a visitor education center to help educate those generations, again, that are growing up with no memory of 9/11 like we all have experienced. So appreciate the time and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Jim, and thanks everyone for helping us sort of level set on where you're coming from. And that's actually a great jumping off point to some of this conversation, where all of you have mentioned change in a number of ways. And I think sometimes when we start to think about memorials, and so often we create memorials in really permanent materials, marble and granite and steel, and we think they're these sort of unchanging objects, but each of you has talked about some way that the memorial, the area around it, that they're growing, they're changing, they're being added to. So I'm curious, if you think over the course of the life of your memorial so far, what have been some of the biggest changes in how it's been used or experienced by visitors?
I can go first if that's okay. And as usual, I'm not going to answer your question 100% directly, but you made me think of something. Yes, we are stone and metal in the parapets, but water and the trees are softer. They're more organic. They are a living, breathing part of the memorial. And so I think it's interesting that you said that memorials are built to be solid, to be permanent, to be unchanging, but people change them. We knew that family members and perhaps friends who visited might want to leave flowers or small tokens, but we did not anticipate that people would do things like use Scotch tape to make sure that their tribute would stay. So we've had to evolve ways of, and it's very important to us because it was important to Michael Arad's vision that every visitor in the morning experience it as though it was the first day, as though for the first time, with no flowers left or flags from the previous day. So that's another, maybe not change over time, but change as part of the memorial. People come, they leave an American flag. The pilots and flight attendants leave wings or other pins. People leave notes. People leave memorial cards or mass cards. In addition to flowers, or people also leave highly personal items. Ballet slippers and a jar of beach sand were among the very first tributes left on the memorial, and we had to scramble a little to make sure we understood for whom they were left and to make sure to save them with the appropriate contextual information. So I think that the memorial is the same every day, but it's new every day. And I think the water, and in the past few years, you could see the trees grow. They were skinny little things when we first planted them, and they've grown upwards, they've grown outwards, and they're they make a real difference to the life on the plaza, I would say.
I would
And I guess
add-
oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Amy. I'm sorry, ma'am.
That's okay. I just wanted to say I've had the privilege of visiting. I think I first visited Flight 93 maybe in 2007. So I've seen that one grow, and I first heard about the Tower of Voices behind you, Steve, on that visit, and I have been waiting ever since to see that. I've been back several times, but not since it was completed and that auditory element was added. So I am so looking forward to another opportunity to hear that, to visit again.
Well, thank you, Amy, and I can share for those viewing this particular panel. If after the panel you went to earthcam.com and then typed in Tower of Voices, you can actually view and listen to the tower 24/7. And since we dedicated in 2018, we've had over 3 million views. So really a beautiful part of the memorial. But I was going to add, Amy, something you said triggered me with kind of the bricks and mortar element of certainly Pat's the law enforcement memorial, and certainly the incredible majestic beauty at the Pentagon, and certainly the elements at Flight 93 have that element of bricks and mortar. But another part that I think is often overlooked is the natural element. So when Flight 93 it plummeted into the earth, it went into an abandoned strip mine. And so it was a very scarred landscape. And over time, the original design with Paul Murdoch from Los Angeles, also a design competition, part of that design was 150,000 seedlings. So about 8 years ago, we started what we call reforestation, plant a tree at Flight 93, and kind of 12, 15-inch seedlings, which are now well over 10, 12 feet high. So it's pretty cool. And I'd love to next year have Jim and Pat and Amy have a group, because we're right at about 132,000. So we will reach our goal, COVID dependent, next April, late April. And we'd love to have a group of volunteers from the respective memorials come help us celebrate that milestone, which again, turning that scarred landscape into the beauty that we see today. So again, certainly an invitation from our partners at these great memorials to come late April. Maybe kind of put it in your notebooks there to come and join us for a day or two.
Would love to.
Yeah, I'm going to take you guys up on it.
My birthday's in April, so I'm definitely coming. My birthday.
Mine too. I'm April 9th. So.
Oh, that's great, gentlemen. I love it.
I mean, if I may add just a piece, and when you talk about bricks and mortar, and earlier I was saying, someone had asked me how you feel when you walk through. I mean, the powerful feeling of this wall was the importance of when we had to expand, how would that look? What would that view look like? And I know that the process in Washington, D.C. is no easier than anywhere else. I mean, you have the Commission of Fine Arts and Historical and all the areas that are so pure and important. But what we wanted to make sure is that this memorial looked like it grew rather than it expanded outwardly in a way, that it scalloped in a way to where you would look at it and it would look natural. If it had to look so unnatural, people would be asking more questions and they wouldn't have the feeling and the emotion that we all want our visitors to have. And that is that peaceful understanding where we heard Amy eloquently saying they leave these belongings and personal notes and pins and things. And we want to make sure that we don't take that away. But unfortunately, we have a living memorial, and so is 9/11. As we see over 300 names of post 9/11 deaths because of cancer, and 72 on the on-site of when we engraved and the following year. But the importance of it is that we are evolving because the world has evolved and changed, and our adaptation and our assist and people who have responded have made our lives easier and possible and more palatable and possible. But their sacrifice now is that it makes our memorials grow. And we don't know with COVID, as we saw, COVID has been like a leading law enforcement concern, as we see 300 line of duty deaths to date, this very date right now. 177 of them are COVID related. 46 are traffic and 46 are gunfire. And then we have 31 that are other. If you take a look at those numbers, you're taking a look at increases. What's going on, right? So we have to think about how do we adapt. But when you said a question earlier, and I don't mean to take much time, but I wanted to say, you said, you know, who does it impact? I think that all these memorials have to impact everyone, because it's not meant to be a private thing. It's not meant to be for one group, one person, or one thing. Because if it does, you've not made what you think you should have made. And that's the beauty of art, in order for someone to feel and express themselves in the way they feel necessary to honor those who have honored them, in whatever capacity it may be. Whether it's an officer, whether it's a mom, it's an aunt, it's a brother, it's a sister. It could be from any capacity, as long as they can honor them faithfully and responsibly. Thank you. Sorry for taking up so much time.
Oh, no, Pat, it's great conversation. And you got me thinking about a couple of things I wanted to share as things change over time. The first trees that we planted at the memorial, and this was some feedback from some of the family members. They said, you know, don't make it 184 trees, because with my luck, the tree representing my loved one will die. So the idea was to have trees there to make it more park-like, and but not to make a one-for-one reference. It was meant, you know, the memorial units themselves, the benches representing each person who died. But it was interesting, the first trees that the designers wanted to put in, they planted, were Japanese paperbark maples. And those trees did not do very well at all, because we discovered later that those trees needed to be under a canopy. Well, there's no canopy next to the Pentagon. So those died, and we ended up putting in crepe myrtles, and those have flourished. So it's been interesting to see now, as you drive by or as you walk through it, how the plant life and the vegetation has really made it a very special place. It's next to the Pentagon, it's next to a major thoroughfare, but a lot of times I go in there and you lose yourself in the memorial, and you kind of think about what happened there, the impact it's had, and you don't hear all the street noises nearby. And I can remember when we were meeting for the jury, they said, you know, this is going to be a place that's hard to get to because it's on the Pentagon. So we want to make sure there's enough meaning and enough things to consider so people can spend some time there. And it's really evolved into that. Another story I'll share is that the way the memorial units are organized is you have, 5 children that were killed on Flight 77. There was 2 little girls traveling with their parents, Dana and Zoe Falkenberg, and 3 kids that were on a National Geographic school trip with their teachers. And so those age lines are very near the entrance of the park. So you walk up and you'll see 5 memorial units with some trees scattered around. And then there's a big gap. And it's interesting how people react to that gap, because it picks back up with someone, the 3 kids were 10 and 11 years old, born in by 1990. They're on the 1990 age line. And then it picks up again with someone who was of working age. So they were like 22, 21 when they died. So it was probably, sometime in the 80s when they were born. And that's been interesting to see how people react to the fact that, these were children when they first come up to those benches. And then it picks up with working age adults. Because I don't think a lot of people recognize that, yes, it was the nation's military headquarters that were hit, but you had 5 children that were on Flight 77 that also died in that attack.
And so I think we're laying out a couple of interesting threads to follow, and one that maybe we'll set aside for the landscape architects another day, but this like really powerful idea of the connection between nature and natural environments and healing, and the way that can be evocative for us. And if we had hours, I would love to keep diving into it. Kind of one of these other threads that keep coming in, though, are the number of people and voices that get connected to this, sort of at all levels, from talking about even the design competitions to families and descendants and survivors to visitors from locally, regionally, nationally, internationally. Each of these places that you care for and the stories that you think about touches a lot of people, and it impacts them in different ways. And so I'm curious how you think about balancing all of these voices, making space for all of these voices, and when you choose to kind of center on some within that kind of the larger set of people who are connected to a site.
I can, since my microphone's off or on, I'll go ahead and jump in. And I think, Braden, one of the things that generated the idea of the Visitor Education Center was the ability to share some of these stories and talk about what you just mentioned. And the Visitor Education Center, which we're planning for now, has exhibit space. And the exhibit space is all about the response and the continued response. I mean, the memorial and our visitor experience is about what happened that day and how we responded in the years after 9/11, the war in Iraq, the creation of Homeland Security, the way we board airplanes with all these different agencies that were set up to oversee that, but then also how we continue to respond today, almost 20 years later. So it's interesting, and I feel that we're fortunate because our visitor experience is again about what happened that day, but then what happened after 9/11, how we continue to respond. So it'll allow us to continue to tell those stories and be relevant, because you think about how much has happened in the 20 years we've been reminded of it because of the 20th commemoration, about all that's happened, and we still continue to deal with terrorism and deal with these issues. And I think it's just been very interesting to kind of think back and reflect on all that's happened just in the short period of time. When you think about it, 20 years since this all happened.
I could add that we offer interpretive guided tours of the memorial. I was lucky I think both times that I visited the Pentagon Memorial to have learned about it from two different people. But, I'll just say, nonetheless, I was floored both times when I saw Dana and Zoe's names. I knew who they were. I knew exactly how old they were. I knew why they were on that plane, but I kind of emotionally flipped out because I was looking for their parents' names. I was looking for Leslie Whittington. I was looking for their dad, and I knew where their names were with their age, but I will tell you, I started to cry because I thought, oh, those little girls aren't with their parents. But even though there was good reason, and once I remembered, I was, it did make perfect sense. So I think having that interpretive tour for people, even though all of these places, Flight 93 and the Pentagon and ours, they're totally self-guided. You can totally understand a lot. It's nice to have a little bit of interpretation, and through those interpretive tours, whether it's in person or through some of our audio tours, you can learn a bit more about the unusual things that certain people did, whether it was Wells Crowther, the man in the red bandana who's so well known, or the firefighters and police officers who were trapped but rescued from stairwell B. Trying to think of some other examples. That's another growing part of the memorial, is learning from the public about what they want, including from teachers and school groups who visit.
I'm curious, these are really interesting and powerful examples. I'm also curious, thinking about some of the things that folks might encounter in memorial spaces that they are connected to where they are, how you start to think about voices that are coming into conflict with each other, right, in these spaces, as they want to remember differently, as they want to express different kinds of impacts, right? This could be descendants and family members who want different things from a space, right? People who had really different kinds of lived experiences of one of these events or the aftermath of them. And so I'm curious how you think about having voices that don't always necessarily agree with each other be connected to these spaces.
Well, I'll jump in real quick and be brief. One of the things that we're trying to do with the Visitor Education Center is have conference space as well to be able to have some of these discussions, Braden, that you're talking about. I can imagine symposiums and things like that that we could have and bring people in and different speakers in to kind of talk about some of these things you bring up, how we've changed, how we look at things differently. What does that mean as it relates to looking back on 9/11? So those are some of the things that was the genesis for the idea of the Visitor Education Center. One, as Amy mentioned, that there needs to be some kind of interpretation there for people to understand what happened, because it's sometimes it's too hard to figure out unless you're there with a docent or with someone to explain it to you. But then the idea of being able to have conferences and talk about these things with groups of people, that's what we're hoping to do with the Visitor Education Center once it's created.
A few weeks ago, family members and synagogue leaders of the Tree of Life in Pittsburgh, and I don't think they'd mind me sharing this, but they came to Flight 93 just before September 11th and shared an entire day. We spent the entire day together, along with the president of the families of Flight 93. And really the objective of the visit was they too want to memorialize and take special care of their loved ones who died in October of 2018, 11 total in that shooting. And I think that's the beauty of memorials collectively, that we're all in this together. And sadly, I'm sure that we will continue to work with one another and help the next memorial through the trials and tribulations of the successes in New York and the law enforcement memorial and the Pentagon, and we're continually evolving. But one thing's for sure, my day stops when there's another group of men and women who want to do something special for their community or for their families or for their loved ones. And that's something that we all take tremendous pride in. And one further thing I would say is that our oral history program, that's Amy's really pride and joy of bringing together individuals who were there, a state trooper who was first on scene or a firefighter from Shanksville. We have over 880 oral histories, and we share them with researchers and on our websites and so forth. But folks, as we all know, we're not going to be in these positions forever. We're going to give the next generation of our successors these tools, and before you know it, it will be 50 years. And yeah, the Park Service in my case is in the forever business, but I really feel collectively with the experts who are able to do these oral histories with those who were there. And that to us is a very important element, just like it is to Jim and Pat and all the other memorials around this great nation, really kind of solidifying in time a piece of history, tragic as it may be. And oftentimes, Braden, that's exactly what they are, but there are a history, and how we remember them and talk to those who were there is really critical to our journey.
I couldn't agree more. And the memorial, and fortunate in a sense, each year during Police Week, we make sure during our vigil that we are, giving the most amazing, we feel, tribute to however many names of officers, had lost their lives in that previous pub year. And doing so, we share educationally to the families and to civilians and to people across our country and outside our country about the sacrifices and the stories of law enforcement. And then, like a memorial like we expanded, as Jim, you're saying educationally. We thought educationally too. We wanted a museum, so we expanded also to a museum. But in doing so, we also want to go back to our stakeholders and make sure that our stakeholders are being represented the best they can, and then survivability for us in a sense, as we are not federally funded and desperately need the assistance from all our stakeholders. And that's everyone. That's not just law enforcement. We wouldn't be around if it was just one culture or one group. We have to survive together through education, social media, partnerships, and also through donations and the ability for us to survive and for our memories to continue. I think that this year we're having, just in a few short days, we're having our candlelight vigil where we're having it live right on the mall. And it's going to be, for 2 years of our surviving families that will be read that year, over 700 names. And as we celebrate their contributions and their memories, we're educating the community and public that although COVID has stopped and we couldn't do it again this past May, we did not stop. And that's our duty. And as people who run and represent are ever changing, sometimes has to evolve, Braden, with what goes on around us. And normally in October, although it's the 30-year anniversary for the memorial, it's not the reason why we're having it. We're having it so we can honor very powerfully, appropriately for our fallen and for their families. And that is the most powerful education you could provide to anyone, where you could feel it in your heart, you could feel it in your mind, your body, and your soul. And as you hear Amy and you hear Stephen and you hear Jim talk about all the memorials, we all have that because they represent true heroism, true selflessness from all aspects, from that child all the way up to a senior. So that's the honor I have to be a part of and to hopefully share with all of you and share in the future and educate the public. And it's very unique that we have this opportunity, and we should do it and do it with all our honor and representation for the best interest of all.
It's really powerful, Pat. And I think you all have talked about, I mean, it's impressive to even hear the way that you've impacted each other across your sites, right? That visits to each of these sites have impacted you personally, again, like kind of the personal as well as the larger one. And it's, people have talked about education in a few moments here. And right, again, Pat, what you were just trying to talk about of, right, this doesn't just live in the mind, this is living in the heart, this is living in the body, this is living in the spirit. And so one of the challenges, and I know you all try to put really positive things into the world through your institutions, right? And one of the challenges that memorials and memory workers around the world face is that, right, the subject matter that we're engaging with, evokes all of these things you've been talking about: grief and pain. It evokes the kind of beauty and the unity that you've mentioned as well, and the sort of some of the highest virtues of humanity. And as people come into contact with that, our reactions can be really positive. That can, grief and pain and virtue can push us into really positive reactions, and they can push us into really harmful reactions too. And so I'm curious, in your education and the way you construct these sites, how do you try and help people come into contact with these things and find their way towards responses that are really positive towards themselves and towards other people?
I can try to tackle that a little bit. And I should say that I'm a curator and an oral historian. I'm not an educator by training. So I'm giving you my sense of what our educators do. But I think two things are very important. Well, three things are very important to our educators. One, we want to help kids especially, but people of all ages find themselves in the story, either as responders or perhaps through the canines who came to be part of the search and rescue and the therapy dogs, and with the ethnic diversity, to be able to, people from more than 90 nations were horrible. It's horrible to say that people from more than 90 countries were killed. So we want people to understand it wasn't just Americans, it wasn't just New Yorkers, and that our visitors from all over are part of the story. Another thing we try to I hate to say use the word combat, but I can't think of a better one, is we want to provide accurate information so that children especially can learn to distinguish between conspiracy theories grounded in thin air and actual reality, history, facts from the people who were there or who studied the attacks and what happened. And the third, it's very important to us to not incite or create Islamophobia or to foment hatred on any level. So I would say those are three big areas that our educators try to touch on. That's important in the museum. That's the job of the museum, is to present, to interpret, to educate. The memorial is more about the people who were killed, but as I said, more than 90 countries, almost 3,000 people.
Folks, I was just going to kind of capitalize a little bit on the education element. Braden, you had asked about, whether it's our ambassadors in New York, they're known as docents, and Jim, I believe at the Pentagon, they're known as docents. But the fact is that these men and women, many of whom have been here for over 20 years, literally since day one, they come here on an ongoing basis to try and bring a smile or just a warm heart as a greeting. Oftentimes not even having to say anything, but having the visitor know that they are there. And we could not do what we do at Flight 93 without our ambassadors. More than 10,000 hours a year for a very quaint, small little hamlet here outside of Shanksville. It's remarkable what our volunteers do. But that being said, we also have instituted a significant distance learning program. And if COVID, as challenging as it's been for all of us in so many ways, one of the bright spots is that it really kind of forced us to look at the technology element. And so we have been doing webinars and so forth. Not too long ago, we've reached over 350,000 students across the United States with the technology. I can't even do it in an Excel spreadsheet, but there's a lot of these young kids that sure as heck can. And they are able to bring these programs to VFWs, American Legion, senior centers, high schools all over the United States. And I'm very proud to report that next year we're going to go to Israel and Germany and New Zealand and bring these programs to those in other countries. And for us, it's not just Flight 93. We talk about the nation, we talk about the other sites, but we also have themes about courage and doing the right thing and patriotism. So it's very, very coordinated. And I think when students, whether they're 4th grade, 8th grade, 11th grade, or whomever the recipient is, when we hang up that Zoom, end close, it's our hope that they have a little different perspective with themselves and those seated right to the right of them and to the left of them about being a better person and better stewards of this great nation and the flag we honor so greatly.
I was going to comment a little bit on what Amy said about combating conspiracy and then the no Islamophobia. It's been interesting. We've been pushing out a social media campaign, and we've had to get to because we get responses through social media about how can you be raising money for an event that never happened. And we've been trying to do something called myth versus reality. People say, well, there were no parts of Flight 77 that were found. So we're showing pictures of, well, yeah, here we go. It's right here outside the building. I think some of it might be that people could actually see the buildings hit New York, but they didn't see something hit the Pentagon because it happened so quickly, or there weren't cameras in the field in Shanksville. So it's just strange to me how people can think that this is an event that didn't happen. The other thing that I think is about the Islamophobia. I can remember being interviewed by somebody a year ago, and they were asking me, do you hate Muslims? And luckily, I had the presence of mind to say, no, I don't hate Muslims. I hate terrorists. Because I grew up in a military family, and we actually spent time in Tehran, Iran, back in the 70s. My dad was stationed there, and I can remember my mom saying, "You're not going to be an ugly American. You need to respect different cultures. You need to accept that." And I think one of the stories that's sometimes is not told is where the plane came. Flight 77 plane came through the building is probably 50, 60 feet away from a non-denominational chapel at the Pentagon, where services are held almost daily. But more importantly, every Friday there is an Islamic prayer service held there, because there are Muslims that serve in our military. There's chaplains that attend to their needs. So again, we talk about the stories and combating some of these ideas that people don't understand what happened. That, to me, is again the importance of the Visitor Education Center and being able to get out some of these stories out there to combat some of these things.
Stephen, you've talked about being in the forever business. And Pat, you've talked about how society continues to change around us. And so I wonder if we kind of turn, we've looked in the past, we've looked in the present a little bit. I wonder if we just think for a moment about the future that lies ahead of us all. Right, as society will keep evolving and our relationship to past events will always change. I live in Maine and was in Portland just the other day, and there was a small memorial to the Maine, the battleship. And I was thinking about how different my experience of that memorial would be from somebody from 1900. Right, and these things shift and change over time. So as you think about the future of your memorials, you've talked about building a few buildings and wanting to start some new programs. I'm curious, even beyond that, sort of how do you envision the memorials needing to grow over the next couple of years or decades? Yeah. Where do you see the growth coming for these? Yeah.
If I may just say, I think from the memorials perspective, we need to be able to hit all voices and all ears, whether it's through social media, through education. We shouldn't have any barriers on communication. That should be our high point. And I think our adaptation has shown that when you have people in areas of social media and marketing to help you provide those resources. But when we do things like our events and memorials, who are we touching? How are we able to bring everyone to those things? How is everyone being a part of that? When I say everyone, and touching every populace, not just law enforcement. When the candlelight vigil, we share it with everyone. And that's why you want social media, you want it to be live and taped. We want to make sure it's in the classrooms. We want preparatory aspects when it's over, people seeing things in the museum. You want all those things to just, work together. And as we have with our new CEO, Marcia Ferranto, she had very clearly created the three pillars of our organization. And the foundation being the memorial. And then you have the museum, where you see the memorial, you have the sacrifice, the remembrance, the honor, and the commitment of the officer. And then the stories continue on into the museum. And then on the third pillar, that is the education portion of us. And that's where we try to do our officer safety and wellness, Destination Zero programs, enhancing our social media outreach and best practices programs for law enforcement. And this is all done without federal funding. We have grants for certain things that we were able to achieve through these programs, but for overall, the memorial is not federally funded. So we have to figure out ways to be able to reach everyone, where it's not so easy to just say to one core group, this is what we do, and the message goes out immediately. We have to think beyond that, outside the box, as everybody would say, or my teachers would say to you, think outside the box, Patrick. Well, we have to think outside the box for us all to be able to make that adaptation. So, we are in many ways very strong things of concrete and stone and steel. but our beauty is our ability to adapt to our social needs and being able to socialize our stakeholders into that environment, into our world, and have them see it from afar when they can't reach it and drive to. They could see it from a classroom to learn the historical aspects. And as they can see it during the time when it's the stakeholders for Police Week, where they feel important, as they should, for the sacrifices of what they do each and every day and willingly do. So I see that's the story when you would look at it from the memorial's perspective on how our adaptation and how we're going to move forward with the best we can, communicative, transparent, open, with honor and powerful statements of what our contributions and stories are, specifically regarding a memorial and a museum. As you see, Stephen, Amy, and Jim, powerful. Their stories will be easily shared and told as long as we have the ability to share it amongst all those waves. And I'm talking about the media too, where we wouldn't have to just ask for them to be involved. They should be naturally involved in wondering what's going on in our worlds each and every day, as we share the most important part, and that's the remembrance of what historical contributions these folks have given. So, thank you.
Yeah, well said, Pat. And if I just wanted to share, September 24th is a very big day for this site for two reasons. Number one, it's the day, September 24th, 2001, is the day that the FBI turned over the site to the coroner and the local law enforcement community. And then it's also the day in 2002 that George W. Bush, as I mentioned, signed this memorial into law. September 24th, just a few weeks ago, what we did was we sent out an invitation nationwide to every single first responder who was at Flight 93 between September 11th, 2001 and September 24th, 2001. And I'm happy to say that we had about 130 individuals, many of whom flew in from the West Coast, from Texas. We had retired state troopers, we had retired FBI agents, Red Cross, firefighters, DMORT, the mortuary group that came in, and as well as two FBI chaplains out of the Pittsburgh division who were there in 01 and who were still on the job, and a few family members. So we brought together, as a cop, I have to have a name for every operation, and we called it TY 924. Thank you, 924. And it was a beautiful, beautiful event on a Friday afternoon. And it culminated with the family members inviting all 130 of those individuals to the crash site, to the rock itself, to the boulder, and leading in prayer and moments of silence. And it was for all 2,977 lives that were lost that day. Very, very powerful, powerful afternoon. And then thanks to our friends group, it culminated at the local American Legion, where individuals were able to leave the memorial and then go and have a beer and a cheeseburger and a roast beef sandwich, and really kind of that continuation, many of whom had not seen it, hadn't been back since 01 and hadn't seen so many colleagues that meant so much to them. So I just wanted to share that. Again, my connection to law enforcement is profound. And again, honoring these men and women in law enforcement, we do it every day. And we invite Game Commission and troopers and law enforcement, DEA, to train here kind of in the back 40, so to speak, with canines or whatever it may be. And again, it's who I am, it's who I'll always be. And again, having been to the memorial, law enforcement memorial several times, and being so closely affiliated with them all, and U.S. Park Police and others, again, it's such an honor to be a part of this and hear from Jim and Amy and these other places of remembrance that mean so much to not only the United States, but to so many around the world.
Yeah, I was just going to say what got me thinking about something that Pat said, all voices, all ears. When you talk about the memorial Pentagon Memorial is going to be there for as long as hopefully the Pentagon will be there. But what changes is the discussions you have with visitors, and you need to be And I think that's what we're trying to do with the Visitor Education Center, to continue to be able to evolve and meet the needs of different groups. But I think I wrote down the word discussions. You know, it's asking the hard questions, or it's talking about 9/11 and what happened and what it looks like 20 years later, 30 years later, 50 years later. I think we need to be prepared to continue to evolve and have discussions and serve the needs of the generations that are growing up after 9/11. So I think that's going to be an important part of education center and the programs that will continue to evolve. I don't know what they're going to look like, because you just don't know what the needs are going to be, 10, 15 years from now. But it's important to be adaptable, I guess, and be able to develop new programs that support the needs of future visitors, because the memorial will be there, but it's how we look back at it differently that will change and evolve. So that's what I hope for with the VEC, to be able to have these types of discussions.
No, and that's why we continue to collect objects and oral histories. We are far from finished. There are so many, we've acquired so much, but there's so many more stories to learn about, new perspectives to hear from, to hear about, and the objects that survivors have saved. The 20-year mark, I think, freed some people up to let go of some of what they've been holding, whether it's a survivor's dress or sneakers, and the voices and the impact of COVID, the impact of what has been happening in Afghanistan. The world keeps being the world, and there are connections between the attacks of 9/11 and other attacks around the world. And if the connections are not literal in terms of ideology, in terms of who did it and why, still the notion of terrorism is what binds, terrorism and memory is what binds all of us together.
Thank you all. And we have many, many more things to talk about, but I think our time together is coming to the end. So maybe one last question for everybody as we think one more time about the folks who are listening today, whenever that today may be for them. As you think about the folks who may have been able to come to your sites, or they may not have yet, right? Hopefully they'll get there sometime in the future. What's one thing, an action, a mindset, a perspective, a value from your memorial that you hope they would take away with them and live with for the next however many days? So something they would take from your memorial and do or hold or live going forward.
I'll jump right in.
Mhm.
I hope they would take away honor, commitment, that responsibility and respect, and share that, how impactful it is to feel that someone would give their life for me and do that willingly. And people are out there still doing that. That's what I want people just to realize, that impaction you have to feel that there. And if they could feel that, then they understand the true emotion of the 22,611 on the East and the West.
Tough to top that, Pat. But I would say something very similar. The first word you said was honor. And that's the exact same word that came to my mind, is that, honor the sacrifice of those that died on 9/11, those on the airplanes, those inside the buildings, including the Pentagon and the World Trade Center buildings, but also those who are dying each and every day, both through suicide as well as the ramifications from the medical complications and the disease that is now coming. And it's a plague for so many first responders at all 3 attack sites. I can assure you of that. And I think that's where collectively as a group, we remember those that died that day, but also that we continue to honor our first responders. I think our law enforcement officers need us today more than they ever have. That to say thank you and just go up and shake a hand and just let them know that we appreciate what they do. And the first responders, the EMTs, the paramedics, firefighters, and we could go on. But that's why Flight 93 in my particular case, but I think all memorials that we're here discussing today, that's what we do each and every day, is bring those people's memories alive, and at the same time letting folks know to appreciate those who help us at our biggest time of need. And to me, that's what we try to do.
I would say that I agree with everything that Pat and Steven said. And I would just add this: when I walk through the memorial, I look at it, I think about, we're all brothers, sisters, moms, dads, have nieces and nephews, uncles, So when you look at the cross section of people who died, I would like people to think that, we're more alike than we are different. And I think that's, to me, the message that I stay with as we look forward to trying to create a special place for people to have these discussions.
And I don't know how to answer that question. So I'm going to answer it just a little differently, because I do agree with what everyone has said. But one thing that I think one of the most important things I've learned as an oral historian is how being compassionate was such an element of the response, and the response starting on those planes and inside the buildings the moment the terrorist action began. The care and the compassion that those and courage and bravery, but I'll just limit it to compassion, that the flight attendants felt for their passengers who they felt responsible for, how the people inside the towers held the door for each other, helped each other down the stairs, the kids and families in Canada who made apple pies and arranged to truck them to New York across the border, the woman in Iowa who set about to make a quilt for every single 9/11 family member. I think that's the underlying theme, is the human compassion that saw the light of day on September 11th and afterwards.
Well, thank you for those, and thank you all for all of the insight and perspective that you offered us today. So Jim, Pat, Stephen, and Amy, Ray, much appreciated. Thank you for all of this. And to everybody who's been taking time to listen today, thank you as well for spending time with us. And we hope that this enriches and deepens and enables you to take on some of these questions in your own communities, wherever they may be, whether those might intersect with one of these sites at some point, or if it's something that you're building and supporting people with around you. And so with that, Marcia, will hand it back to you.
Thank you to all of our esteemed panelists. And thank you, Braden, for helping us navigate this reflection on memory and the role of memorials in our lives. And once again, I would like to thank our sponsors. Our programs are made possible by our corporate partnerships and by individuals across the country like you. For those of you who have not given yet, this is the time that you can support us. please go to lawenforcementmuseum.org, where you are able to make a donation right there online. Or consider making a gift today by texting programs 2021 to 41444. Before we go, I want to make sure you all are aware of the special week we're just beginning. Rescheduled from its traditional date of May 13th, this Thursday, October 14th, will be the annual Candlelight Vigil to memorialize those who made the ultimate sacrifice. The vigil will be held on the National Mall beginning at 6 p.m. You can find more information about the vigil and about other memorial and museum activities for Police Weekend 2021 on our website. Again, that's lawenforcementmuseum.org. And don't forget, our museum is now open to the public Friday, Saturday, and Sunday each week, with additional days open for Police Weekend. We look forward to welcoming you back to the National Law Enforcement Museum. Thank you again for joining us, and make it a great day.